Home daycare or daycare center, which daycare option is best for your family? Outside of deciding the name of your little one, choosing the right daycare will be one of the most important decisions you will ever make. And with the cost of childcare seeming to increase by the day, the minute, and the hour, it can be hard to decide which daycare option, home daycare or daycare center, is right for you. In this episode, we're going to break down the pros and cons of each daycare decision, the pros and cons of enrolling your child in a home daycare, as well as the pros and cons of enrolling your child in a daycare center. And we're going to end with 3 important questions that will make your daycare decision, home daycare or daycare center, super easy and feel just right for you. If you're new here, welcome to the New Moms Daycare Podcast. I am your host, Candace Denise, a daycare owner of 14 plus years who uses my childcare experience to help moms place their little ones in the best, safest daycare possible. Every week, I drop daycare episodes to help moms choose the best daycare for their little one without the stress, without the anxiety, without the overwhelm. I help moms make the decisions that are best for their families with confidence, with assurance, and make it simply and easily. So let's jump right into this episode. Let's jump right into this topic of which is better, home daycare or daycare center. Now, as a daycare owner who's owned a home daycare as well as a daycare center, I can say this topic is always near and dear and close to my heart. While it's true, home daycares are different than daycare centers, there are pros and cons for each. So let's run through the pros and cons for home daycares, and then we'll run through the pros and cons of daycare centers. And we'll end this episode with 3 questions you can ask yourself to make your daycare decision super easy. Now, first up are the pros and cons of a home daycare setting. A home daycare refers to a licensed daycare that exists within a provider's home. It operates out of the home, and oftentimes the provider will segment parts of their home and outdoor space and devote it to their daycare. While licensing numbers may vary from state to state, generally home daycares are licensed for anywhere from 4 to 14 children, and they normally provide care during normal working business hours. The pros and cons of home daycare are smaller group sizes and more individualized care. Because of the ratio and because of the licensing size of home daycares, naturally home daycare providers have less children and are able to give each child more individualized attention than could be given in a center setting. A home daycare has a home-like environment and provides a home away from home comfort that many parents find appealing. Home daycares also have the same caregiver every day, which strengthens the attachment and the bond between a child and their caregiver. There's no rotating caregivers like there is in centers based on the hours of day that a child is in care or the days of the week that a child is in care. It's easier for children to form close bonds, and that's one of the biggest pros parents feel about a home daycare. Now that we've discussed the pros, let's jump in to the cons. The cons of home daycares are that quality depends heavily on the provider. So you want to make sure when you are doing home daycare tours that you are assessing the daycare environment. You're seeing how well it's run, how structured it's run, because home daycare providers have a lot more leniency than daycare centers with how they schedule their day, with how they schedule their meals, with how they do basically everything. So that is one con of a home daycare. Home daycares can be wonderful. I owned one for many, many years, but it's important to make sure if you are looking for the home daycare route and you're sure you want to go that way, that you find a quality home daycare where the provider is providing a quality early learning experience for your child. Another con of home daycares is there's limited staff backup. So oftentimes with home daycares, the provider, the daycare owner, is the sole provider, although they may have assistants depending on how many children they are licensed for. Because they only have a maximum of 1 or 2 people working at the daycare, oftentimes if a provider is sick or if a provider goes on vacation, the parent will have to make alternate arrangements for their child care. While many home daycare providers provide recommendations and references for time that they are out and they are sick, it just depends on the parent's comfort level with the references, how far away the daycares are from the actual daycare their child is enrolled in, whether they're able to use that option. So that's one con, is that when the provider is sick or the provider goes on vacation, the daycare is closed. Now, while most home daycare providers give parents plenty of notice, it's just something to note and something that some parents feel is a con just because they have to find alternate daycare for those times when the provider is sick or on vacation. The last con of home daycares is curriculum can vary. While many home daycares are now jumping on the early learning bandwagon, there are still some who are slow to get on the early childhood education journey. There are some who are more lenient with their curriculum, or there are some who don't have a curriculum, and that is okay. That's not against licensing standards. So that is one con to home daycares. You really have to do your research and be thorough and make sure you're placing your child in a home daycare that has a schedule that you approve of, that you feel is good for your child's overall development, and that will really enhance your child's learning through their formative years. Now let's get to daycare centers. So there's pros and cons to home daycares, as well as pros and cons to daycare centers. And I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, you know what, so far I've gotten all the pros from the home daycare. It made me really think that home daycare was my option. But then you said the cons. You started sharing the cons of home daycare, and then it made me change my mind. So what is going to happen with the center? Because I'm thinking with the cons of the home daycare, maybe a center is better. Just let me get through a few pros and cons, and the questions you're going to ask yourself, that's what's going to make your decision so much easier. Because in every daycare setting, there are pros and cons, but really it comes down to the type of child you have, their personality, your desires for your child, what learning environment you want for your child in their early years from 0 to 5, and also your financial budgets. But we'll get to those questions in a minute. Right now, let's jump in to the pros of a child care center. Now, a child care center, unlike a home daycare, is a daycare center that operates in a commercial building. It does not operate in the provider's home, and it often has a greater license capacity. Many child care centers have a license capacity of anywhere from 15 all the way to 70 children. It depends on the actual space of the child care center, as many states have a child to space ratio, and they go by the square footage of the building. But daycare centers, one of the pros is that they have a very structured early learning environment. Most daycare centers, if not all, have a structured schedule that operates the same from day to day. They have a structured toddler curriculum, a structured preschool curriculum, and really it's all about making sure that you find a daycare center, if you want to go that route, that really has a learning style that you agree with. Daycare centers also have larger staff, and they have a backup system. So unlike home daycares, because daycare centers are licensed to care for a larger number of children, they have multiple teachers, multiple assistants, so that backup care or daycare closure is rarely, if ever, necessary. Many times daycare centers operate all throughout the year and only close for weather-related issues. Like if there's a storm that comes in, a hurricane that was unexpected, God forbid, an earthquake or a fire, the daycare will close with a center. So that is one pro, is that you don't have to worry about backup care. Socialization with same age peers is another pro. And here is what I mean by that. In home daycares can be a mixed setting. You can have an early learning home daycare where infants and toddlers are also mixed in with toddlers and preschoolers. Or you could have a situation where toddlers are mixed in with preschoolers. It just depends, or infants and toddlers are mixed. In a daycare center setting, because of licensing guidelines, every age group has to be strictly separate throughout the day. If a daycare center is operating by state guidelines, infants and toddlers have separate classrooms, toddlers and preschoolers have separate classrooms, and school-age children have separate classrooms. Now, while the mixing of the ages is not a big deal, it's not anything detrimental, you want to make sure that the provider is very organized and structured in those cases if you're considering home daycare. It's not bad if the ages are mixed, like if there's infants and toddlers in one room or there's toddlers and preschoolers. What really matters is the caregiver demeanor and the way they structure their home daycare program. But we're talking about daycare centers, so I'm going to get back to the centers. That is one pro for some parents who would like their child to be completely separate throughout the day, is that classrooms are separated by age. There's multiple classrooms, and sometimes, in some cases, centers have larger outdoor play space. Now that we've gone through the pros of daycare centers, let's jump in to a few cons. Now, with every good thing about a daycare center, there can be drawbacks depending on what you want for your child. So here are the cons. Daycare centers often have larger groups of children, which means that children get less individualized attention. Home daycare providers are able to give the children more attention just because of the numbers of children and the level of care they're able to distribute, right? The smaller the number, the more care, individualized, personalized care can be given. There's higher child to adult ratios. So oftentimes at daycare centers, you might have a larger group of children assigned to one teacher or assigned to one teacher and one assistant. Your child can be exposed to more illness because the larger the group of children, the number, the more illness and sickness can occur. And here's why this is a big deal, but not really a big deal. Children, when they first start daycare, they will get sick if they've never been in a daycare environment. That just happens. They'll get like a cold, a runny nose. They build up immunity so that the sickness isn't something that continues. It's just like their body adjusting to being in a daycare setting with multiple children. While you may have a few incidents in a daycare center where children come home sick, it's not anything to say, oh, no center. But that is a con from some parents' perspective. The last con of a daycare center is the price. Daycare centers typically are anywhere between 2 and 3 times the cost of home daycare. So if daycare cost, tuition is an issue in your budget, that might be a con of a daycare center. So now that we've talked about the pros and cons of a home daycare and the pros and cons of a daycare center, I want to wrap up this episode by asking yourself a few questions. Like, I want you to ask yourself a few questions. As you can see, I haven't had my full morning coffee this morning, but I want you to ask yourself 3 questions that will make your daycare decision super easy. Because I know you've heard about the pros and the cons of home daycares. You've heard about the pros and the cons of daycare centers. And you might be thinking, you know what? The home daycare option sounded real good. And so I heard about the cons. And the home daycare center, those sounded real good. The daycare center options until I heard about the cons. Now I'm confused. I don't know which daycare option to pick. Here are 3 questions that will help make your decision simple and easy. The first question you want to ask yourself, whether you have an infant, toddler, or preschooler, is, does your child seem to thrive in a calmer environment where they have individualized attention, or do they thrive in a busy setting with other children? If your child is the type who enjoys a busy setting, very independent, loves being around people, a daycare center would be your better option. A daycare center would be a good choice. If your child is more shy and reserved, if your infant enjoys a lot of special attention, a lot of individualized attention, and would benefit from having a stable caregiver, the same caregiver day in and day out, home daycare would be a better option for your family. The second question I want you to ask yourself is, what is my daycare financial budget? While I know you would spend any amount of money to make sure your child is safe and comfortable, I've seen many parents try to commit to a daycare center and wind up coming back to a home daycare, to my home daycare specifically, because they couldn't afford the daycare center tuition. There is nothing wrong with being able to afford the daycare tuition, just like there's nothing wrong with not being able to afford daycare center tuition. If you know in your heart of hearts, paying for daycare tuition at a daycare center week in and week out, it's not really in your family's budget. Home daycare would be your best choice, because if you're financially stressed, if you're financially strapped, that will be a problem for you. Even though you might love the daycare center, it will be a burden. Your children will feel the stress, and it will just not be worth it in the end. There's many quality home daycares you can find that meet your expectation. You just have to set up tours and start looking. So financially, if placing your child in a daycare center would just break your family's budget, consider a home daycare instead. Now, the third question I want you to ask yourself, the coffee's starting to work slowly but surely, is I want you to ask yourself, how important to you is caregiver-child connection? Now, I ask this question because if your child is very independent, very assertive, loves being around people, a social butterfly, your idea of caregiver to child interaction, your importance, what you place on it, the value, it may not be as high as a parent who knows their child is a little shy, needs special attention and care, needs to have that strong bond with a caregiver, would really benefit from having one caregiver versus having teachers that may work Monday through Thursday and another teacher that comes in on Friday. Then a home daycare would be the best for you. So ask yourself, as a mom, how important is that for me? Do I want my child to be with the same caregiver every day, or do I not mind if the caregivers rotate? Is my child independent enough where being in a setting such as a daycare center, it wouldn't harm their development? It wouldn't cause them to be self-conscious. It wouldn't cause them to withdraw, to not speak up, to not communicate. You have to ask yourself those questions. And then once you have the answer to all three of those questions, what environment your child seems to function best in, whether it's a smaller, calmer environment or a busy, socially charged environment where there's lots of people, lots of children to interact with. Once you ask yourself about your financial budget and you say, what's feasible? What can I really afford? What can my family afford? And once you ask yourself, what value do you as a mom place on the caregiver to child interaction? Like, how important is it for your child to be with one caregiver? Does your child need that strong caregiver bond? Or based on your child's personality, are they okay with being in a daycare center setting? When you ask those questions, you will have your answer. Which option is better, daycare center or home daycare? As always, I'll see you in the next episode. And if you have any other questions, be sure to grab the New Moms Daycare Guide and Checklist. We walk moms through looking for daycare, evaluating daycare, and setting up the post-enrollment transition, right? To setting up routines and systems so that you're comfortable, as well as your communication with your provider is all tracked, it's all logged, and it makes it simple and easy. This guide has literally everything you'll need from the start of your daycare search to post-enrollment. When you've enrolled your child, everything you need to know. You can go ahead and visit the link in the show notes. It'll take you right to it. And daycare, home daycare, daycare center, any daycare questions, they can always be answered by looking inward, not outward. By asking yourself, what really matters to me? What is my budget? And what kind of personality does my infant, toddler, or preschooler have? Once you ask yourself those questions, every daycare decision, whether it's a daycare decision about pricing or a daycare decision about enrollment, home daycare or daycare center, it will make the answer to your question so much easier. As always, I'll say it again. I'll see you in the next episode, and good luck on your daycare search.